Hey, shalom, shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Prophecy Roundtable, where we promise to give you a stimulating conversation, but we don't have all the answers. But we like to dig into things prophecy related. And today we have a special guest. Sam is going to help us to understand those 2,300 somethings, right? Days, evenings, sacrifices, whatever in the book of Daniel, right? And so that if that's one of those questions that has been nagging at you, well, hopefully we can give some insight in tonight's show. So great to have you guys with us, and of course, Sam, I'm so glad that you're here, and of course, Scott Hartwell, and right on time, brother John.
John
That
Howe.
was John. That timing was impeccable, I have to say.
I had to reboot, man, so it was pretty close.
That was pretty amazing. All right, very good. Very good, very good. Well, I just want to remind everybody that if you are loving this show, please do subscribe, give it a thumbs up, share it, click the notification bell. That helps that amazing magical algorithm to do its, algorithm kind of things. So please do that. You can also get the Way Congregation app. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. It's got great stuff in it. So get it. A lot of free books. And speaking of books, if you'd like me to read Corrupting the Image 1, 2, or 3 to you, they're now in audiobook. I'm terribly excited about that. And I hope you will let me read it to you. So you can go to my website, douglashamp.com, and get that. Or you can go to Amazon, just go to those books, and you'll see the audio version right there. Or you can go to Audible if you prefer to do that as well. So without any further ado, Sam, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so we're going to be looking at this whole thing of Daniel. Kind of give us the big overview. What's the big picture of the 2,300 days and evenings and the sacrifices and all that stuff that is in that passage? Because it is rather enigmatic and there's all kinds of different opinions about it. So kind of give us the basics and then we'll go from there.
Well, the angel says that in answer to the question that Daniel had, at least 3 times he said the vision pertains to the time of the end, and so we know that it has to do with the end, and we also know that it discusses the vision in Daniel 8, the cessation of sacrifices, and we know that in Daniel 12, then days 1290 and 1335 are tied to that event, in addition to the abomination of desolation. So the vision as a whole is given to Daniel to try to understand the times of the end. And we're given these time intervals that I think are worthy of discussion. So that's kind of the overview.
Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to bring up that passage right now so that we can just look at it. I think going back to the word is always important. So this is in Daniel 8:13. And then I heard a holy one speaking. Another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. All right, so that's the basic thing that we're talking about, right? And of course, yeah, what does that mean, right? And then you also mentioned in Daniel chapter 12 that there is a parallel passage there. So let me just bring that up. Then I heard a man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things will be finished. Did I get the right verse there? I feel like, oh, here it is. Sorry. You have this other one. And from the time the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. And then, but blessed is he who waits to the 1,335 days. All right. So we've got all these different things going on here in the text. And of course, this just begs the question, what does it all mean, right? So maybe, I mean, there's also, of course, more to this, right? We have a ram, we have a goat. Are those historical, future? Could they be both? What's up with Alexander's empire? How does that play into this? Because obviously in Daniel chapter 8, there's a lot about Daniel's empire. So I don't know, why don't you kind of just take it away there, Sam.
So, getting to the, I think those are great topics. I think Daniel 8 is a wonderful topic of discussion. And as you say, there are many views, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I've got the way that's right. I can share how my best understanding, but I'm also open to being convinced otherwise. So, but the question, I think it's important. This is, and you're an expert in Hebrew, and you've lived over there. I think this is one of those times it's important to get to the interlinear and to see what the original Hebrew has to say. In Daniel 8:13, the question is how long the vision, the daily. We talked about this in our last program. How long the vision, the daily? And the answer is given evening, morning, 2300. Now, most English translations have that in plural. They will say days, or they will say evenings and mornings. But the reality is the Hebrew is singular in those passages. And so the answer that was given is evening, morning, Erev, Boker, 2300. And I think that's important because the word in Daniel 12 that's used is not evening, morning, it's days, yom. So, when you look at the original Hebrew and you look at the context of the question, it raises the issue are these English translations that we have correct? So, and I'm not blaming the translators. They did the best they could with what they knew at the time. But, I'm just wondering, from the Hebrew itself, the context is about the daily. And the question is, how long does the vision last regarding the daily? Well, the daily is stopped. It has nothing to do with resumption of the daily. It has to do with cessation of something that's already ongoing. So, if we let Scripture interpret Scripture, I would just share in Ezra chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, there's a reference to the resumption of the daily back before they built the new temple. And there's a reference, again, evening and morning. And then after that, it uses the word days just like it does in Daniel 12. So I think there's a separation there. And I think that could be a clue that really what they're talking about is the number of sacrifices that are missed, which would be 2,300. That's the way I see it at this time, anyway. So I'm open though for discussion.
Wait, so maybe just to summarize, I was kind of doing camera things, but so are there two sacrifices in one day or one sacrifice?
There's two. There's an evening one and there's a morning one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we would divide 2,300 by two. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
And what that allows you to do, the problem that you have, if it's 2,300 days and you know that the sacrifices are stopped, they're stopped, and then you have 2,300 days. Well, that exceeds the end of the 70th week.
True, that seems to be
because
problematic.
Because if the stop to sacrifices is at the midpoint,
Mm-hmm.
that only leaves you 1,290 days. So why would you count 2,300 from that point?
Okay, so this gives us 1,150 days. Is that correct?
That's correct. And what it would imply is that there may be a resumption of sacrifices about 5 months before the end of the 70th week. Because if you add 1,150 days to the 1,260 at the midpoint, then you're going to end up about 5 months short of the 70th week.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, that raises some interesting.
So when do you think the sacrifices resume within that last week?
That's just the way that I see it now. But
do you think they start 1,100?
I think the clue in Ezra 3 is that if Daniel were going to be internally consistent, then why would he not say 2,300 days just like he did in Daniel 12? Why would he use evening, morning? And if we go to Ezra 3, clearly in Ezra 3, in the interlinear, he uses evening, morning, and then he follows that with days, in those two verses. So that would be consistent with Ezra, at least, to look at those. And when they're talking about evening, morning, they're talking about the sacrifices. Mm-hmm. When they're talking about days, they're using days.
So, John, what was your question? Can you repeat it?
Well, did they start 1,150 days before the abomination of desolation? You're not hearing me?
Okay. Yeah, we had a little issue before. So it was say your question again, John. I'll see if I can.
Do the sacrifices start 1,150 days?
Do the sacrifices start 1,150 days before the abomination of desolation? Is the question.
So there are some that believe that the sacrifices would start, that far in advance of the abomination. And there are two problems that I see with that. I mean, or not problems, just, things that I would want to have answered. One is, if you start the sacrifices, how long do you think they're really going to last, given today's political climate on Temple Mount? I don't think they're going to last for, more than days or at the very most a couple of weeks. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is if they started, if you're saying that 2300 signifies when they start, the problem is that in Daniel 8, the context has nothing to do with when they start. Everything that's in Daniel 8 is about the cessation. There's no reference at all to a resumption of sacrifice in that time.
That's really interesting. So if we were to assume that this is happening at the first part of Daniel's 70th week, that would suggest that you have 1,150 days into that 3.5 year period, somewhere in there. Okay. And then it's going to stop. I guess we know when it stops. I think we know, which is the abomination of desolation. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of
in Daniel 8, 13 and 14, I mean, the little horn stops the sacrifice and he does the abomination. The next question is, well, how long how long the vision the daily? How long is that? So, I'm taking it as it's 1,150 days from the time that it stops. I don't think it has anything to do with resumption. It has everything to do with cessation in the context of the Hebrew there.
Yeah, John, we can hear you just fine, I think.
Okay.
So for some reason, Sam's computer is not talking nicely to the other computer. So
okay,
that's the problem. But if you've got a question, I or Scott can relay it or something.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So let's move on here. Let's get to another question. So what do you think about the ram and the goat, Sam? Do you think that those are historical, future, both?
I definitely think there's a historical component. Could it be future? It could be. It could be a dual prophecy. That's possible. I don't take a firm stand on either one of those. It could be dual, but I do think it's historical. There are some that would say, well, there were more than 4 divisions of Alexander's empire, so he couldn't have fulfilled it. That's one complaint that those that would say it's all future would have. Another one is, it says that the horn of the goat is the first king, and so how could that be Alexander, since he came from a long line of kings? And I think it's possible that side is correct, but on the other hand, I wouldn't rule it out. And the reason I would say that is, first of all, when the 4 divisions of the goat horn occur, there's a word there, and maybe you could help with that, but it says 4 conspicuous horns or 4 notable horns. And I think that most people would agree that there were 4 main divisions of Alexander's empire. There was Lysimachus in Thrace. There was Cassander in Greece. There was Antigonus and then Seleucid in Assyria, Turkey, Iran, and then Ptolemy in Egypt. So those are the four main ones. So the Hebrew word for conspicuous is notable. That means notable. Well, maybe there were other unnotable divisions, or there were minor divisions that weren't important. And so, I wouldn't hang my hat on, well, there were more than four divisions of Alexander's empire, because really, there were four main ones. And
I think it's hard to dispute that there were four main.
Right.
I mean, he had four main generals, and they broke into four, as you just said. I think that's pretty well established. And when he hits the ram that has two of these major horns, Medo-Persia, I mean, that seems to be like an amazingly good fit. I think the question is, could it have another application later? Scott?
It must have. I mean, in other words, just pull up verse 17. And again, this is real simple. It doesn't say this is for the time and then the next 100 or 200 years after Daniel wrote his prophecy and Greece became a world empire. It says, understand, son of man, for the vision is for the time of the end. So could there have been a partial type of fulfillment with Greece and Medo-Persia? No doubt. But there's prophecy is cyclical. So rather than us trying to stick a pin on, at this fulfilled it, the question really I'm starting to see that should be asked more often is how often it will be fulfilled.
Interesting.
For a final fulfillment.
Yeah, what's interesting about the beast or Antichrist, right, is he really embodies all of the former empires that have come before him. And Alexander had this notion, he got stronger as his life went on, that he was actually literally the son of Zeus. And there's some speculation, did he really believe that? But he kept talking about it, right? And one time he even took his army way out in the middle of nowhere to go to this temple that was truly off the beaten path to get this prophecy from an oracle. And that's where they, supposedly they confirmed it, according to tradition. They confirmed that, he was the son of Zeus. Now, I bring that up because I think it's interesting. I think Satan has been kind of prepping. He does not know when the end will come, right? And I think when Jesus showed up, he's like, oh my gosh, is that today? Like, oh no, we're going into the day of the Lord. I'm not quite ready, But guess what he did? He then possessed Judas. And what did Judas become? The son of perdition, right? That's kind of interesting. And of course, what is the beast Antichrist called? The son of perdition. So it's at least plausible that Alexander the Great was a candidate to become the son of perdition, right? I'm not saying he was, but I think he was definitely in line to do that. And I to ignore that it was Alexander the Great, I think would be a great disservice. But to suggest that it's only and exclusively Alexander the Great does seem to create some problems, as you just brought out, Scott, because it clearly says it's going to be the time of the end.
The other thing that's interesting when we're talking about the sacrifices and whether or not and Sam and I discussed this today, is whether we will see these. Because if you go back to verse 9, 10, and 11, let's pull it up real quick and scroll back. And so this little horn is going to go exceedingly great for the south. And look where it grows to. It grows up to the host of heaven, and it casts down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Right. And then this is where he even exalted himself as high as the prince as high as the prince of the host. And by him, the daily, the continual, is the way some were taken away. So it's this does not seem to be happening down here on earth. In other words, this seems to be something happening up in the heavenlies.
I would totally agree with you. My take on this is that going up to the prince of the host, I think the prince of the host is Michael. Okay, I don't think it's Jesus. I think it's Michael. And we're going to see the battle in Revelation chapter 12, right? The war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with Satan and his angels. Okay, and again, my unique take on this is that the beast Antichrist becomes a hybrid with Satan himself. Okay, so when Satan is fighting, it's essentially the beast fighting. They become linked quantum entangled, as it were. Okay, and so I would definitely agree with you, Scott, that I think that is talking about a future reference to the Antichrist, the beast, making war with those in heaven, but then it's not going to work out, and then Satan is cast to the ground, and there's no place found for him. So anyway, that's my take on it.
So, getting back to the idea, and it does say several times that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Mm-hmm. So, one way to look at it is like all elements of the story pertain to the end. But there's another way to look at it that I think we should keep in mind or consider, and that is, if I were going to write a book about World War II and our war against Japan, I could start it at the time of Pearl Harbor. And it would all be within a 4-year period, and it would be about that time. I could also say, well, I'm going to start my book when Perry sailed his fleet into Tokyo Bay 150 years earlier to lay some groundwork. And so I think it's possible, because I don't think the Hebrew demands it. It is possible that the story, although it does pertain to the time of the end, it could have a historical element in it. And maybe the ram goat would be analogous to Oliver Perry sailing into Tokyo Bay. So, that's just another thought. I wouldn't pin all elements to be necessarily at the very time of the end, although they could be. I think that's very possible that they could, but I don't think it has to be.
Well, and to your point too, and here we're talking about like super uber spiritual, like up in the heavenlies in this third heaven area. And what we have is essentially, we have these powers, you have principalities over Greece and over Persia. And we know we have these assignments. And so maybe we're seeing this play out over time as these principalities control the people they're in charge of. I like to call them the puppets. And then the puppets do their bidding, and I think that's that we can certainly see that cycle playing out.
And one of the elements of the vision is that in the latter period of their rule, and you look at the Hebrew in that sense, and it's okay, like at the end, it's again at the end. So you could have 4 divisions, but it could be 2,000 years later when the little horn is going to arise out of one of those divisions. It doesn't have to be that it came out of the ones imminently that Alexander had. It could be, he comes out of the area of Egypt, or he comes out of the area of Assyria, or he comes out of the area of Thrace or Greece. But he arises out of one of those 4 original divisions.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And let's remember that the beast that was, is not, and will ascend out of the abyss, right? So there's something mysterious about that. In one of my books, I trace it back to Nimrod. And I think Nimrod was the first prototype, right? Hence the prototype of this beast idea. And then Satan has been trying to raise up a beast, maybe in every generation, quite possibly, to just be ready, for when the end is going to come. He never knows when God is going to say, okay, that's it, I'm opening these seals, or Jesus, of course. He just doesn't know that, right? So he's kind of trying to be ready. I think Hitler was an incredible candidate for the beast, but he didn't do it, obviously. But
80 years too soon.
Well, I agree with you, Scott. I agree with you, but I'm saying, had you been living back then, we would have all been like, this might be bad, because that was pretty radical
not
stuff,
if I was
man.
consistent with what I've believed since
Yeah,
I was
but you're
a kid.
not that smart, Scott. You're giving yourself too much credit, dude.
Listen,
you really
I blame my dad.
You think, but had you been living during World War II?
I lived in the 80s and the 90s and the 1990s, and all the prophecy
I won't argue
people
a hypothetical.
No. When all the prophecy people were freaking out, I was like, way too close. We're not even close to 2,000 years yet. We've got at least another 30 or 40.
I know, but you're assuming you would know back then what you know now, which is not.
I know since I was 7.
Well, you're not. You weren't born in 1940 something.
No,
or 35 or whatever. So
whatever. Yeah, but Doug, all the guys I know.
Hold on, Sam.
I was going to say all the guys that I know that were in World War II. They were looking at the contemporary things in the world and saying, "Hey, this is different."
Yeah,
now.
because it was
no
different.
doubt.
It
No
was
doubt.
different. It was radically different, you know? So, yeah.
What can you share John's comments?
Oh, he said that the guy, yeah, sorry. I'm going to do something, a little experiment. I'm going to remove you and put you back in, and hopefully that will fix it. Sam, one second. Oh. All right. Sam, say something amazing, and maybe, or John, say something. So
I'll say, I don't know if I can say anything
all right,
amazing.
can you hear me now?
I guess you don't. Okay, well, that's too bad. Well, anyway, what John was saying is that the people that were living back then were saying that this is different, right? And I totally agree with that point, that it was different, but obviously, right, they didn't have all the hindsight that we now have. We can say, well, that wasn't it, right? But living through it
but I'm saying
different.
The people that lived in World War II now come forward into the future.
So,
and they're saying,
I mean, people have thought through the centuries they were in it, right? So, yeah. I mean, in hindsight, we have that benefit. I mean, Israel is reformed as a nation. I think that was a crucial element that was missing before. But nevertheless, if I were in World War II, I would have thought I was right in the middle of it.
World War One. I mean,
World War One. Right.
Yeah, these were terrible events.
I mean, Civil War wasn't exactly a piece of cake. So.
Exactly, right? I mean, so yeah. I want to get to Joel's question. I think he asked a fair question. Why can't the ram with two horns be the leader of a false religion, such as the Pope? And why can't the shaggy goat with one horn be the Antichrist, who destroys the false religion and institutes worship of his father?
The false prophet is not actually destroyed. The mystery Babylon is destroyed, but not the actual second beast is. I mean, I still think the Pope's the number one candidate for the false prophet. I mean, has been, still is, and unless something changes, probably will be. But I mean, I don't see
the current one is way too old.
Yeah, I don't see that. I don't see anywhere in Scripture where the first beast destroys the second beast. I see both the beasts getting cast in the lake of fire at the same time.
I think Joel is getting at a really good question. I mean, if the ram goat are future, if there's a future element to them, then I mean the angel tells us directly that the little horn is Media and the big horn is Persia. So we have to figure out, if we're looking forward to the future of a ram goat fulfillment, how would that comport with what the angel said about the two horns of the ram?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I always take it back to all of these different nations ruled over the physical city of Babylon at one point. All right. So Medo-Persia ruled over it. Greece ruled over it, even though it wasn't much of anything. Well, Greece was still, Babylon was still pretty impressive back in Alexander's days. And then, of course, you had the Roman Empire. They ruled over it. By that time, it was a big nothing burger. But still, they ruled over it. And I think it was Hadrian who went to Babylon because he kept hearing about this amazing city. And he went there and he's like, okay, is this it? He's like, that was boring. But still, the Roman Empire ruled over Babylon, the city of Babylon. And I think that is the nexus point that we have to look at, right? So that any of these possible candidates of either empires or kings that we're going to be considering have to have ruled over that particular place. So
that would be your Ottomans and Turks as well.
Well, fair enough.
And Turkey would certainly be. Wouldn't Turkey be part of? Wouldn't it be considered at least parts of Turkey? The Medes. Weren't the Medes sort of like the Kurds in a way? Weren't they sort of like
the Medes and Kurds seem to match up.
They're in the area of
one second, Sam. We got John talking, so it's too bad we can't.
The Medes would match up with the Kurds, which are sort of cover Iran, Iraq, and Turkey,
and Syria, parts of Syria. They were like correct. When France and England carved up the map, they basically left out the Kurds. Is that what it is? I mean, they just did not give them a homeland.
Yeah, they're the largest ethnic group in the world without their own home, without their own sovereign nation.
Yeah, they were carved up into four, right? Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, and kind of that hasn't caused any problems over the years.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. Well, it's too bad we have this little technical dish.
Let me. I'm going to exit.
Go
Let me
ahead.
exit and I'll rejoin.
Wonderful. Okay.
All right.
All right. Good idea.
That might work because it worked for the two of us last time when he did that. So now maybe
That's
John will
true.
be able to hear him. So,
Yeah.
and we have to have
So-
John hear everybody.
Yeah. There's a so somebody in the chat is asking about the let's see. All right, and he's back. Okay, so we're taking a question here. This is the Great Commission. Who has prophecy of coming to liberate Jerusalem when their Mahdi shows up of the Jews? Yes, that's right. Islam. There'll be 200 million man army of our holy Bible speaks of. Any thoughts on that? Anybody want to?
I mean,
Add some comments on
to think that Islam and China, I mean, again, this is under the assumption that we're getting close and really close to the end times. Okay, we could be 200 years off, even though I don't think so. But to think that Islam doesn't play a part somehow into this scenario it's lunacy. Now, I'm not like Joel Richardson and put all my eggs in that basket. But I do see Islam playing a huge role, and they could actually raise a 200 million man Islamic army. So,
but I think the main problem is that the Bible is very clear that it's not a man army; it's a really weird hybrid chimeric army that's coming up out of the abyss, right?
That's the supernatural part of it. So,
well, yeah, and guess what? I actually found the very pictures that show what those things are going to look like when they come up out of the abyss. So I think, ever since Hal Lindsey and he came up with the 200 million man army, that China, that would be a people's army, right? I mean, it's not even like, it's not a standing Chinese army. There's no such thing as that many people fighting. But I think the Bible's very clear. Revelation chapter 9 is talking about very scary creatures coming up out of the abyss that have wings. They have stingers, right? And again, I showed 100% accurate picture of what this thing is going to look like. That is from the ancient world, and I think we would be amiss to skip over that.
But is the army of the fifth trumpet the same as the sixth trumpet?
Well, I would suggest yes, that when they open the when they release the four generals or the four angels, right?
Right.
In my estimation, those are basically the top dogs in the army who are going to do the bidding of the king of the abyss, who is Satan, and they're going to, do what he has them to do.
Okay, so some people say trumpet 5 is different from trumpet 6.
Well, I think, again, in my opinion, they're all related. Okay, so these are major things, right? Having a huge army of 200 million chimeric creatures is just plain scary. But then you need someone to lead them, and so I think those four angels that are bound at the Euphrates River, I would suggest that those are going to be the kings or the generals that will then rule and direct this army to do all kinds of.
But the five
stuff.
At the fifth trumpet, they're limited, and I mean we could go through and make a like all good prophecy teachers do, make up a chart.
Yes,
and compare the length. So Sam must be able to hear me now because he chuckled at my
laughing at your jokes,
my stunning humble wit.
I like it,
and and so but there are differences. It seems like the fifth trumpet demon horde is limited to 5 months, and they're commanded by Satan, their king, Abaddon. And then the six come along, and they give a specific number, 200 million. Sort of tells what they do, and it's a little bit different than what they do in the fifth trumpet. And and so I mean, look, we could fit this into modern day and age. In fact, I was just doing some research today, and it could be that China and India, and I've said this a number of times. When you look at the demographics, they're on the verge of having 200 million men between those two countries without hope of a spouse. So I'm just saying that's unprecedented in human history. And if this is the time at the end, then I think that's a significant factor that we need to factor in.
You know, what keeps going through my mind as I think about a 200 million man army is, given the difficulty the Russians have had supplying their troops in Ukraine, can you imagine the logistics and supply lines to supply 200 million men?
Sure. I mean, you look at that now. The Russians sort of solved that a little bit in World War II, I think, where they had the second wave of guys. The first guy had the gun, and then the other guys just carried ammunition to pick up the gun of the dead guy ahead of them. Not a very, but look. I mean, Russia has a demographic problem. I mean, this is like China. Japan is losing population really on an epic scale. I mean, it's like 750,000 people decline in population last year.
Yeah.
I mean, the implications of this, and China's on the verge of doing that, but then you had in the one child policy that they enforced, and then India, where they did the one child policy, or the sex selection, because they could figure, they wanted boys, so they don't have girls. And you look at the demographics with them, and sometime over the next decade or so, I could make the case that there will be 200 million men just in those two countries that will not have the hope of a spouse. And that would seem to fit the sixth trumpet, which I think I'm sort of inclined to think that it's different than the fifth trumpet.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
I respectfully disagree.
Doug, think about their direction. Look at their direction, and I think Joel pointed this out. The fifth trumpet beasts come from the abyss, and the sixth trumpet, whatever those 200 million are, and I agree with you, they're supernatural. I just don't think they're the same thing, if you will. Like, in other words, look, it's like a different kind of super bug. How about that? Supernatural bug.
Yeah, but look, I mean, so
they're not the same.
If you take 9A and you take 9B and you put them as a composite image, this is what shows up, right? And this is Nergal. This is found on a Kuduru stone about 1200 BC. Okay. Look, it has the wings. It's got a torso of a man. Mm-hmm. It's got a lion's head as well as a man's head. It has a scorpion's tail. It has a serpent head phallus, right? Everything that's described in Revelation chapter 9 is right here, right? So this thing, it's talking about these. And Nergal is the god of the dead. Guess where he lives? In the underworld, okay? And guess what people in the first century, the Jewish apocalyptists, were expecting was for these things, or, the hordes of hell, to come flying out with arrows shooting. And guess what this guy is holding? He's holding a bow and arrow, right? I mean, again, read my book, right? Because it's in there. This is in there. You can ignore it.
But again, I'm not ignoring you or even disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that they're two different kind of super bugs. Okay. They're two different kinds of hordes of hell. One is specifically given assignment for 5 months to torment those with the beast. And then the other 200 million looks like they have a bigger assignment. And it doesn't have an ending point that I can see. Obviously, I think the ending point is when Judgment Day ends and Yeshua's on the throne and all prophecy is fulfilled. But until then, they're just, otherwise he describes them differently. They're similar. There's no doubt there's similarities.
But Scott, when you do a composite image, that's what I'm trying to tell you. You take 9A, the description, and the fifth trumpet, and then you take the sixth trumpet, you put them together, and that's what you get. What I just showed you, right? Okay. So, well, I gave all the footnotes, so you can take it or leave it. But all right, moving on.
So now we can combine the trumpets, but we.
You can combine them all. They all merge together. It's all about 7.
Okay, so we've got more questions. So we've kind of looked at the ram and the goat. Alexander's empire divided into 4. Let's see here. So
we should talk, though, I think, about how it plays out in contemporary times if it's a future prophecy.
Okay. Sam, do you want to address that?
Sure. So, there was one thing that we didn't get to, and how could Alexander be the first? And being from a line of kings. So, his father Philip, created the Hellenic League, the League of Greek city-states, they were all independent. And through his military might, he united them, almost all of them, all of the major ones. The one that he didn't incorporate into that was Sparta. And Sparta did not join that league until 331 BC, after the Battle of Megalopolis. One of Alexander's generals defeated the Spartans, and they were forced to terms, and then they joined the league. And so that was really the first time in history that all of the major Greek city-states, Athens, Corinth, Thebes, Sparta, etc., were united into one. And so I think I wouldn't rule out Alexander once again, because in that sense, he could be deemed first. He could be deemed the first because he was the first to unite. And the word first doesn't always have to be first in order. It could be first in prominence also. So I think there's room to
could it be something, Sam, could it also be something like the first one in a while?
Yes.
You know, like,
sure.
So I'm just thinking like Turkey. Turkey's had a caliphate, and they had, the whatever they called those guys, the caliphs, and who ruled in the Ottoman Empire and everything. But now they've been dormant for 100 years.
So it could apply to the past and to the future. I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't just, some who think it solely pertains, all of the elements to the future, would rule out Alexander. But I would say Alexander still could have, fulfilled that. And I'm still open to it being a dual fulfillment. But, we'll just have to wait and see. I also think it possibly could be, not a dual fulfillment, that Alexander may have satisfied that. Again, we'll just have to wait and see in the future. But I'm trying to keep both sides open in my mind.
Although, except the one thing that Alexander didn't do was do it at the time of the end.
Correct. You're right. And that would be analogous to if I had wrote a book and I started a book about Japan's war with the U.S. and I started it with Oliver Perry sailing into Tokyo Bay, laying historical groundwork, even though the book would be about the time of the period of the war. It doesn't preclude having a historical element in it to lay groundwork.
So let's say that this is the time of the end. And how does this, and this is a future prophecy, how does it play out?
Well,
who's who, and who's the ram, who's the goat, and
so some feel they go back to
I think Larry Bird is the goat, but that's a different subject.
You threw me off track. Yeah, Javan is the word for Greece, and that incorporated what's Greece today, but also parts of Turkey. The Greeks settled all over the Black Sea coast and eastern Turkey. So some would say, well, that's Javan, that corresponds to Turkey. That's possible in my mind. But if you have a clash, some are looking for an imminent clash between Turkey and Iran. And right now they're on the same side. They're kind of cobbled together in a odd coalition with kind of, Russia involved in there too. They've been rivals, and eventually I think they will destroy each other, according to Ezekiel 38 and 39. I'm just not certain when that clash is going to occur, and I'm not sure it's going to be a ram-goat clash. I think the enemies of Israel destroy themselves in Ezekiel 38, 39, and Zechariah 12 and 14.
But does the ram goat thing happen before Ezekiel 38 and 39, and then it's sort of the new sort of combined ram goat thing that's part of Ezekiel 38 and 39?
I think it's possible. Yeah, I think
that's kind of how I think it's playing out. I personally see a lot of tension between Turkey and Iran right now, and I think I shared with you today, and I'll talk about it on Sunday, the looming water war in the Middle East. It's to the point where the Euphrates really we can now understand how the Euphrates, this great mighty river, one of the three most important rivers in the Middle East, can be dried up. But Turkey's building dams all over the place. And now Iran, now that's usually Iraq and Syria, but Iran's sort of taking up their concerns. They're sort of piggybacking on Syria and Iraq concerns about the water that that Turkey is taking away. But then there's another river, begins with an A, I can't remember the name. It kind of is up there around Azerbaijan, and it goes down into Iran. And so, I mean, I think these water wars are going to be a very significant thing at the end times. And we're on the verge right now, worldwide, of food shortages. But then you layer on top of that water shortages and supply chain. I just think there's a whole. I've heard this guy in Ohio talks about the convergence of events, and this seems like a convergence of a whole bunch of things happening right now.
Well, I think that's spot on. The tensions between Turkey and Iran are bound to rise. And 2 weeks ago, I read where actually the Turks actually bombed one of those Iranian proxy militias. We're going to be hearing more and more and more about that. Tensions between Turkey and Iran, who are trying to wield influence in Iraq and Syria. And they're on the opposite side. They're on the opposite side there. And they're only together, to make a nice appearance for the world. But eventually that coalition will totally fall apart, and they'll be at each other's throats. I agree, John.
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation over there right now. So I think, if it's happening now, I think the two parties involved in this ram goat thing are Turkey and Iran. And I could see that what would happen is one of them would emerge superior. And the interesting thing is that in between them, you have, the little horn, the Medes, the modern day Kurds, which Turkey hates. I don't know. It seems to fit together, but we'll see.
Yeah. So, in Ezekiel 38:39, those countries are all united. So if the ram goat occurs before Ezekiel 38:39, that means there's going to be, a conflict, and then Iran falls in line because they're listed in that alliance, and they'll fall in line behind Turkey during that invasion. It could occur later, but that would be how. It's interesting, the destruction of Edom in the Old Testament in Isaiah 34, Isaiah 47. It mirrors that of the destruction of Mystery Babylon, and becomes a haunt for jackals and goat demons and unclean birds, and smoke goes up perpetually forever. And Edom's destruction occurs at the end, just like that of Mystery Babylon. So the judgment against Edom is carried out through the Medes and the Persians, according to Isaiah. So they've got to be intact enough after a conflict with Turkey to be able to take Edom out.
I think, I see Edom as being Rome, and Rome is just being devolved or morphed into what we're currently living in. We're living in Rome. But so
Edom,
what would be your view on Edom? Is it a geographical location? Is it both and? I look at it kind of both and.
So, go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, this is one of the I think we've talked about this question before, are the people groups that are described within these prophetic scriptures, do you trace them all over the world to find out where they are at the end of times, or are you still focused on the geographical location? So when Ezekiel or Daniel saw these visions of these people, was he talking about the geographic orientation of things at the end times, or the people that lived there at the end? Then, most of them moved to Northern Ireland, so Northern Ireland's going to rise up and be one of these kingdoms in the last days. I just don't think that's what it was. I think it's more geographic rather than tracing all these people. I went to the Ark yesterday down around Cincinnati, and I mentioned to someone, I'm a direct descendant of Noah, and that kind of threw them. They were like, "Oh, where's Ken Ham when you need him?" And so, but
You
I mean,
are
that's the point. I mean, at this point, everybody's migrated all over the world so many times that I see these, line tracings and all this other stuff. Well, it means, the the Prince Charles' father was Greek, and so that's where he's going to be the ram or whatever, the Greece thing at the end. I don't know. I just don't know. I think it's more geographic. That's just and it fits in today's world with the geography of the Islamic nations. I mean, this is a massive horde of people. It's, what is it? A fourth or more of humanity belongs to that religion.
Well, I agree with you, John. And Isaiah 34 and verse it's about the time of the end. It's about the judgment at the end. And in fact, it talks about the sky being rolled up like a scroll, just like it did in Revelation after the sixth seal. But it says, my sword is satiated in heaven. It shall descend for judgment upon Edom and upon the people whom I have devoted to destruction. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood, sated with fat, the blood of lambs and goats, the fat of kidneys and rams. The Lord has a sacrifice in Basra and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. And, a lot of the prophecy doesn't have to do with the people. It has to do with the land. And, when it talks about the land of Edom, it's going to become a place of burned pitch where smoke goes up forever, and it's inhabited by demons and, unclean birds.
It's interesting that there is a people group that identifies themselves today as from Edom, as Edomites, and that's the Palestinians. Arabs.
Right.
I don't know why if you read the Bible, why you would say, "Hey, I'm from Edom." They obviously haven't read this book.
Yeah, I'd want to disavow it.
That's interesting. So what do you think are the implications then, if we kind of put this all together? Obviously, different perspectives on how this all works. And none of us has the final answer, obviously. Nope, I don't either.
Well, I'll just make one observation about the war in Ukraine. Prophetically, one thing that's happening is there's a big wave of Jewish Ukrainians that are immigrating to Israel. So just as after World War II, God used that tragedy to cause his people to immigrate to the land, there's a big wave of Ukrainian immigrants coming in. So, I can see God's hand, restoring his people to the land as he said he would.
Yep.
That's very cool.
And a lot of those that think they're the house of Judah probably are from the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, if they want to call themselves Jews, call yourself Jews. I don't care. I don't do the DNA thing. But I do think I don't think this is by any means a fulfillment of prophecy, but it's a conditioned precedent. What we're seeing with more and more people returning to the land. I believe there's going to be an ultimate great future return of all of Israel, which includes the four of us, whether you call yourselves a church or a Christian or whatever, we're all going back to the same place. So I just think that's the greater exodus that we've touched on that briefly in past shows. How it happens, I don't know.
I would also point out the Russians have enlisted Syrian, Libyan, Chechen, and Turkish mercenaries in their army. And most of those groups are thought to derive from the groups that are in Ezekiel 38.
Well, it is true, Sam, that I am on a semi-regular briefing call with some thing called the IDSF, Israeli Defense and Security Forum, and the CEO of that group is retired Brigadier General Amir Avivi, and General Avivi has made the point the number of times that in today's demography, a large chunk of the Russian military is Muslim. So, I mean, I lean towards this. I think the Muslim thing is extremely significant. I agree with, I'm not sure everybody has it all worked out right, but I think this is a very significant thing that's not going away. And we're seeing a lot of tension in Israel right now over, over Iranian and Turkish stirring up trouble in the Palestinian Arab community. So I don't like the term Palestinian, but I use it because that's what everybody else uses. But so this is significant. But I've often thought that we always argue about is Russia Magog, is it Turkey, or is it a combination of the two? And I've often, and then the question is, who's the head of this? This Gog. Who is Gog? And so I've often said that if it is Russia that's involved, they want to get the Muslims off their back because they have a Muslim demographic problem. That's been written about in Foreign Policy and Foreign Affairs and other publications for a decade or more. And so, we get them off their backs for a while because they're not thinking, okay, how do I play into the end times? It's how do I help Russia survive? And so I get the Muslims off my back by helping them take out Israel. Right. I've thought that for 30 years.
Well, and it's a different look at it, but look how God has used Islam so far, sort of as a judgment on Judah to prevent Judah from doing what Judah would like to, at least the religious leadership of Judah, or part of it, would like to do yesterday or in 1948 or a long time ago. And God has allowed Islam to remain in place, have control of the Temple Mount, and is preventing Judaism from being able to even think about practicing their religion from a biblical standpoint. And so even that shows how God has used Islam in his plan for 1,400 years. Because he's sovereignly allowing it to happen, and he's sovereignly not allowing the sacrifices to start, whether they're here on earth or up in the heavens. I think the Daniel 8 sacrifices, I don't think we'll ever see them. I just don't think there's nothing for us to see. I think it's a spiritual.
What do you
like? If you go back in those verses we read earlier, it talks about how he ascends to heaven and where he stops these sacrifices. Again, I don't claim to understand it, but if I just read the text, it looks like these sacrifices are taking place in the heavenlies. Like there's a heavenly war, a heavenly sacrificial system, the daily that stops. And I'm talking about just Daniel 8, not necessarily Daniel 12. Okay, but just Daniel 8, if you just read the text, it just seems like these dailies are not on earth.
I think there's a way to understand that, and there's a concept that there's a Jerusalem above and the Jerusalem below, and that's even sort of incorporated into the word Yerushalayim, which has a dual ending, right? So that there's two Jerusalems, and they kiss right in Jerusalem, the one you can visit, okay, on a tour, all right? So the absolute point, the needle point of between the two, it would be the Temple Mount, all right? And I think that by the Antichrist, the beast, going into the Temple Mount and declaring himself to be God, right? He is then reaching his hand in a sense into that other dimension, and he's kind of giving God the middle finger. So, and I think there may be something, beyond that's happening maybe exclusively in the spiritual realm. But again, I think that is where these really are meeting. And, there's even kind of sometimes people jest about the membrane between heaven and earth is the thinnest in Jerusalem. And, I don't know. I know that when I lived there, there was this incredible sense of oppression. When I was in Jerusalem, I just felt this huge spiritual oppression. When I went down to an ungodly city like Tel Aviv, it lifted, ironically. All right. And I remember feeling this very distinctly. And then I thought maybe it was just me, but then I would talk with other people that had lived there for a while. You don't feel it if you're just a tourist, but if you live there for a while, then you will feel that. And people have completely independently of me confirmed that same thing. They started telling me, and I'm like, no way. Like, I felt the same thing too, so I think there's a lot of spiritual activity that we cannot see with our eyes, but is happening in that area,
I was walking across the plaza of Temple Mount when we visited there, and an unclean bird, a crow, he flew off the dome and tried to peck me in the head.
The only thing I noticed when we were in Jerusalem for a couple of weeks, staying there, was that it seemed like everything in Jerusalem takes at least twice as long as it does anywhere else. Like going to the store, getting a rental car, that type of thing. It just seems like everything is harder.
That's so maybe patience.
That's the impression that I felt.
Yeah.
So Doug,
Joel Blackford had a question. Okay. And his question was, would the sacrifices, when they start in this last week, what would the two witnesses be trying to stop anybody from interfering with the sacrifices? Because I think that has I think it's a brilliant question. It has a host of theological implications too. Like the two witnesses are there for what? To get ready for what? And did Christ finish that? And does that raise implications about, because why are they concerned about these sacrifices if they're not valid sacrifices?
Right. That's a great question because, they're not efficacious. Christ was the efficacious sacrifice, right? So,
right.
Any resumption of sacrifice is really, kind of rejecting what Christ did. So I don't look at them as a holy sacrifice. I just look at them. This is the daily that they did, and they've been wanting to reinstitute because they don't accept what Christ did.
So I guess the question then would be: are the two witnesses, are they Christians?
Well, they're believers.
I think they're believers in Yeshua. How about that?
Okay, that's sort of the definition of it. Then, okay, but then would they not try to interfere with they wouldn't?
I don't think they'd be in favor of them. I mean, personally, that'd be my thought.
I would think that at least one of them, if not both of them, would be saying, Judah, Messiah came, he's coming back soon. Okay. Yeshua is your Messiah. Go study the word, study the prophets. He's coming back soon. These sacrifices are not acceptable. Just like I love, John knows this. You love hostile witnesses when you're trying to prove a case. And we've got the Talmud being an excellent witness for what happened 40 years until the temple was destroyed, as far as the little string not turning white, the doors not staying shut, the big lamp would go out, and they recorded this for 40 years up until the temple was destroyed.
Yeah, but Scott, let's say, what wouldn't they say though? Like, they would know the scriptures. They would say, see, this resumption of the sacrifices, this was prophesied by Daniel, but we're to kind of flesh out all this stuff for you and tell you what's going and what's going to happen and that.
Again,
and if we're still here, what are we supposed to be doing with that information relative to the Jews? Right. I mean, we're supposed to be explaining to them, like, look, God's letting you have this, but you need to understand that, that just like Jeremiah and, and Isaiah prophesied that this bad stuff was happening. God's told us that there's bad stuff coming. So don't get too complacent. You need to get right with God, and that's done through Jesus now.
I mean, if the two witnesses come on the scene and they're fulfilling scripture and preaching truth, and they say, maybe they will, I don't know. Maybe they would support the sacrifices. Again, Paul was doing things after Jesus' death. I mean, he was going to the temple. They were doing sacrifices after his death. I'm not advocating it. I don't think that's the way it's going to happen. But if two witnesses come on the scene and they've, are preaching repentance and truth to God's word, and they were to, maybe more fully explain scripture to us, then that's when I would go, okay, I'll check it out. But until then, I just don't think they're going to be honored. And I don't think, here's my point. I don't think they're necessary. I think you had in at the time that Jesus came the first time, I think you had people that were just as knowledgeable, if not more knowledgeable about the scriptures as any of us or all four of us put together, and a lot of other people, and they missed it because they were looking one direction, and they totally missed it. And so most people in the prophecy community, before you could really declare that this is the final 7 years or this is the final 5 years or 4 years, I think all four of us would probably agree we're going to know when it's the final 3.5 years, when the abomination of desolation occurs. But what if we're sneaking up on that period? Everybody's looking for sacrifices to resume here on earth, and it never happens. And so you've got a lot of people, all of a sudden the abomination occurs, and you got people saying, "Oh, this isn't this." That would be my concern, is sort of poo-pooing things when all other events are aligning, because we're looking for that one thing. We're looking for those sacrifices to start, or we're looking for the temple to be rebuilt. So I believe he's going to stand in the holy place and declare himself to be God. Okay. Right. I just don't think it requires a temple or a tabernacle. I think it's the location, like we did a show probably about a year ago on that.
Right. No, I think that's right. Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, that is the sign. I think, I would differ. I think we will see resumption of sacrifice, but I think they'll only last a matter of days. I can't imagine the Arab street allowing that to go, just for the reasons we've been seeing on the Temple Mount recently.
Well, they don't even like the Jews going up there to walk around, let alone sacrificing a lamb.
So if they did any kind of resumption, I would say that's going to be shut off, practically immediately. And actually, that would make the guy a hero in the eyes of the Arab nation that did that. He marches right over into the holy space, which Doug brought up a very interesting point about, like a dual universe. Really, the Holy of Holies is where the universes intersect. That's where God chose his place where he would dwell and intersect those universes. So the Holy of Holies is the place, as Scott said, and it doesn't matter what kind of buildings around it, because the word for temple in 2 Thessalonians is naos, and that refers to the Holy of Holies.
Well, and so the question I have, I'll ask it again, is when we're seeing all of what are we supposed to be doing with all this information?
That's a good question.
I mean, is that we were just supposed to be making up nice little charts or websites and that type of thing? And there's going to be a real practical rubber meets the road thing that we're going to need to be redoing. And it's like,
I mean, you can make your chart timeline then. I mean, from that point, you're at the midpoint. You've got no more than 1,290 days to go, right?
I think I'm looking for a cloud, and if it starts moving a direction and looks supernatural, and I get fed out of it, that's where I'm going. I mean, and I'm not joking. I believe that what happened in the beginning will happen again at the end.
What I've found at work and elsewhere is that people are afraid. Unbelievers are afraid. There's a lot of fear in the world, and they may not be a believer, but that, I've been asked and approached, hey, what's going on? What does the Bible have to say about this? So I think, John, that's a great question, that there has to be a practical implication, and we need to be ready to point believers and unbelievers alike to, what's happening and to the cross, and it'll be a great time of revival.
And I'll be completely honest. When 2020 happened, I had a complete freak out moment. And recently, I'll admit it, over the past week or two, it's just I have full assurance that everything's going to be okay at the end. But I cannot sit here and say that I don't worry for friends, loved ones, family, and the world at large.
And your 401k.
I don't even have one, so so that's good news. I don't watch stocks, but I'm very concerned. I mean, it's not off topic, but it kind of relates to this question. I mean, we're talking about maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks having diesel rationing. When you have diesel rationing, things don't get to stores. Food, parts, supplies. It's about to wreck. And yeah, I have to admit, even though I do have this faith, I do believe Yeshua returns after 2 days. I'm not positive about exactly when, but it can get a little freaky sometimes if we're just honest with ourselves. We can't always go, yeah, I got this. I'm spiritual man. No, it can weigh on you sometimes. So
Well,
just
I
being
like
honest.
this. I like this discussion in the chat where Joel says, "Well, if the two witnesses says the sacrifices are holy, then I think they are too." And Doug chimed in and said, "Yes." And I listen. I'm not going to do anything against the two witnesses because they've got some extra powers. But it's kind of an interesting thing is that I'm just trying to think like, so what do we have all this knowledge and information and everything. And, we may be able to point, this will be the ultimate PowerPoint. We'll be able to point to this and say, this is that which was prophesied. And I'm just, we got to be careful with that. But, we need to be using it when it's apparent, assuming we're here.
Right.
Assuming I'm still alive, that type of thing.
Well, I think the two witnesses are going to be a major, undeniable, something you cannot ignore when they come on the scene. They might start quietly, perhaps, but when they start making a fuss, the whole world's going to know about it. And they're going to have signs to boot, right? They're going to stop it from raining for 3.5 years. That's going to be tragically
water wars.
Bad. See? I mean, yeah, exactly. Water wars. So if you're already in a drought and now you have no more rain, and these guys are the ones who are doing it. And then they also authenticate it with turning water to blood. They strike the earth with plagues as often as they want. And when the world tries to stop them, then fire somehow either comes from the sky or from their mouth or something and burns up their enemies, right? So the best militaries in the world will be impotent against these guys. They're going to get the attention of the entire world, right? So they're going to be huge. I don't think we're going to be looking and saying, well, I don't see anything happening. That's why I think, all the stuff that we're talking about, all the potential conflicts, the wars and rumors of wars with Russia and Ukraine, I think it's wars and rumors of wars. And it's all, a brick in the wall toward this greater thing. I would agree with that, right? But it's not the thing yet. The thing is, when the two witnesses show up, then that this party has gotten started officially. And then when those guys are dead, which will be around the time in conjunction with the abomination of desolation, maybe, moments before, maybe moments after, I don't know. But, I think scripture gives us enough of a timeline that we can say, okay, we're looking for some major things. And the two witnesses are coming to call the world in repentance to come back to God. Now, we're not told at all from my reading what their opinion of the sacrifices will be. But I agree with Joel. If they're for them, then I'm for them. If they're against them, then I'm against them, right? They will be the ultimate litmus test as to whether God is cool with those sacrifices or not, right? So, but from the Jewish perspective, I think from a zealous believing, not Christ believing, but a God believing, a God fearing Jew who really wants to do what they understand God to be telling them. Obviously, they don't recognize Yeshua. They don't understand or acknowledge the new covenant yet, but they have a passion for God. Those sacrifices will at least be kosher in the sense that they are biblically legitimate, right? Even, again, there's a whole discussion on, what was the purpose of the sacrifices. I think we in the church have really come to the wrong conclusion that these were somehow
for atonement.
Well, the word atonement, it means to cover, right? So it's covering the worshiper. The worshiper brought a korban, a sacrifice. The word korban means to come near. To come near who? To come near God. And to be in God's fiery electric presence, you needed some kind of a covering, right? So it didn't magically take away your sin, but it could cover you to be in the presence of this amazing God. That's what the sacrifices were really about. And then it was the blood of Yeshua that cleansed us from all unrighteousness, right? But there was always something that was absolutely important, which was a confession and a repentance of those things. So if you just brought a sacrifice without that heart work, then it did you no good, right? So I think we've conflated a bunch of things regarding what sacrifices are for. But anyway, I digress. But when the two witnesses come, then we'll know that the clock has truly started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm on the same timeline you're on. I think they'll testify for that first 3.5 year period, but I'm not dogmatic on it. In other words, I'm not saying we could be starting to witness the beginning of the third seal right now, for all I know. I mean, again, I don't align with Joel Blackford's view that the seals were open back in the 70s, but I think they've been open for a long time, but we're starting to see the cracks come off. So I just don't want to be guilty of being dogmatic of this must happen on this timeline when reasonable minds can disagree. People that study the word, people that pray, people that are sealed with the Spirit. That's why I get so frustrated. People think we can have perfect doctrine and perfect understanding. I'm like, okay, go walk on that water and heal those 2 dead people, and come over here to the ward and heal all these paralytics. And you show me you got the power, Yeshua, and I might put you up there with his understanding and his wisdom and his knowledge too. Until then, you see dimly, my friend. So, and I'm not speaking to any of these 3 right now.
Well, guys, we are definitely out of time here. So I want to thank you, Sam, for coming on the show. Where can people get in touch with you? Do you have a website or anything, or is there anything you want to share?
He's low key.
You don't have to. No pressure. We'll have you back. How about that? We'll have you back. We'll do another show.
I'll shoot you by email. They can email me. How's that? Yeah, you can share. You can share my email.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. Thank you, of course, to my wonderful co-hosts. And thank you, everybody out there. We're, of course, always checking your questions, trying to incorporate them the best we can. We can't get to all of them. I'm sorry, because we just don't have enough time for that. Because sometimes some of those questions require a lot of scripture and a lot of discussion to get to them. But
and you can come back and ask your question again and again, and eventually maybe we'll get to it.
We'll eventually get to it. That's right.
You'll wear us out.
That's right. Yeah. So thank you again, guys. Till next time, God bless you. And please do hit the like and subscribe buttons. And until next time.